I'm in a dangerous position because despite the fact that I agree with pretty much everything that Yolanda said, I'm going to tell you about the lessons we learned from the last 20, 30 years, despite the fact that we should forget them. So I'm in a very, very dangerous position. I spend most of my life thinking about the future and talking about the future of real estate and innovation and tech, but I've been asked to talk about what we can learn from institutional investors. Now, your answer to that immediately might be nothing. And I'm wondering whether you all have that prejudice in your minds at the moment, that the answer is really nothing. And I'm going to ask you all a question first to get me started. So let's assume that you've got, let's say, £25 million free cash that you've decided you're going to invest in global real estate. Just think about that for a minute. You've got 25 million free cash, you're going to invest it in global real estate. Now I want you to think about the way you would invest that money. So would you, number one, would you invest in listed real estate shares? Would you invest in REITs, property companies, put it all into a portfolio of listed property company shares? Would you do that?
Not me.
Okay, no need to answer yet, sir. Would you buy units in unlisted property funds? In other words, would you look for a fund investing in Swedish healthcare and invest in that, and invest in a US fund doing Manhattan offices? So would you invest in unlisted funds? Would you, number three, appoint a fund of fund manager? Give him the 25 million and let him sort it out. Or would you, number four, buy buildings? Okay, so they're your four choices. You can buy shares in REITs, property companies, you can invest in funds, you can appoint a fund of fund manager to do it all for you, or you can buy buildings. Okay? Now I'm going to ask for a show of hands. So can you just think about A, B, C, or D, which one of those you can do? Okay, so who would invest in listed shares? I think that's a zero, right? So would you invest in funds? We've got one, two in funds. Can you keep, we're doing this is a joint research project now. Would you appoint a fund of fund manager? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah? Are you voting or are you just sort of, no, all right. 9, let's say 9, Yolanda. And finally, would you buy buildings? Who'd buy buildings? And I think that's the majority, right? So that's, say, 15. 15. Okay. Now, I had a pretty good feeling you were going to choose buildings as the majority. So given that you've chosen buildings, if you did, why? Now, I'm going to give you 5 options. Why would you prefer buildings over funds, shares, or appointing somebody like me to run the money for you? Or Jane, my colleague at the back, Jane Fear. So why? Now, you've got 5 options here, and I hope that this covers all of your feelings. Number 1, you are a control freak. Freak could be a good thing, okay? It's not a bad word, freak. So you're a control freak. You don't really trust advisors. Okay, so that's the first point. The first reason is you want to be in control. You don't really trust advisors. That's why you'd buy buildings. Or, number 2, you want to save fees. You just don't want to pay fees to anybody. Not even the overhead of a REIT. Okay, you basically don't want to pay any fees. Number 3, you're really, really good at choosing real estate investments. You are really, really good at choosing buildings. Okay, number 4, you're avoiding KYC or money laundering checks. Or number 5, finally, you'll use the building for your own purposes. You're really excited about buying buildings because you're going to go and live there 1 week a year, or you're going to use the office building, or whatever. Okay, so pride of ownership. So I'll go through those again, if you wouldn't mind, just bearing with me. This is the last question, so it's not going to be too difficult for you. So number 1, you're a control freak. You don't trust advisors. Number 2, you're saving fees. Number 3, you're really, really good at choosing buildings. Number 4, you're avoiding KYC money laundering checks. And number 5, it's for your own use. Okay. So can you just think about which one of those 5 most accurately connects with why you'd prefer buildings. And if you don't prefer buildings, you don't have to give me any answers, but feel free to. So how many people would buy buildings because they're control freaks and they don't trust advisors? 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. 5. How many would do it because they're saving fees? They just want to basically cut their costs of operations. That's a 0. You're really good at choosing real estate investments. You're good at doing it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Number 4, you're avoiding KYC. Yeah, there aren't going to be many admitting to this one, are there? Avoiding KYC money laundering. Anybody admitting to that? I mean, it is a serious issue. You know, if you're Russian, for example, there are very few investment advisors that will take your money. They will simply say, we're not even prepared to contemplate putting you through the KYC. So it is a real issue for a high net worth investor. Okay, so all right, nobody says that. And then finally, you use the property yourself. You've got some sort of, no, okay, good. Okay, good. So it's really, you're good at choosing buildings. Right, well, let's go and look at the institutional investors who have to work this out for themselves. And we're talking about people who are educated, CFAs, fund managers, 25 years, 30 years in the property industry, global research, but they're not as good as you at picking buildings, right? Because you're not going to give them your money. What can we learn from them? Well, I'm going to tell a story to begin with. Hello, nice to see you.
You too.
Yeah,
How
nice to
you
see you again. Yeah, very good. This is the guy who avoids the KYC checks but is not prepared to admit it, right?
Always.
Always. So when I was about 35 in about 1926, whenever the bad period that Yolanda talked about started, I worked about 100 yards away for a company called Prudential, who have now been called M&G. My first real job was running property research for M&G. And the story of M&G and how it got started is probably worth telling. I apologise if it seems childish, but my students enjoy this story. In the 1920s, there was usually there'd be a group of men, and they were men. It has to be said, they were men, and they were called the Man from the Prue. And they would cycle round the streets of Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, obviously on a bike, with a leather satchel over their shoulder. And they would go from house to house, and they would talk to the people in the house and say, what is it you're worried about? And the man and lady, man's home from work, lady might not have been to work, sit down, cup of tea. We're worried about our pension, and we're worried about house insurance. So the Man from the Prue would sell them a policy for house insurance, and he'd sell them a life insurance policy. And they would pay 50 pence every week, or 10 shillings as it was then. And the Man from the Prue would put the money in his satchel, and he would cycle back to the head office in Liverpool, and he'd empty his satchel, and there'd be a pile of coins on the desk in Liverpool. And then a van would come from London, and it would take all the coins and drive them to London. And in London, just up the road where I worked, the Pink Palace, near Chancery Lane Tube Station, there'd be a huge pile of coins. And that pile of coins had to be dealt with. So what do you do next if you're Prudential? Come on, you count the coins, and then what do you do with them once you've counted them? Invest them. So the Prue has said to the man and lady in Liverpool, we will give you a pension, and the pension will earn a rate of interest of, let's say, 2%. How are you going to invest the money? 1925. What are you going to do with the money? Infrastructure. You'd be pretty much ahead of your time. 1925. Government bonds. Government bonds. Okay, so pretty much all the money goes into government bonds, and it earns how much? 3%. 3.5%, 2.5%. So you're offering 2% to the pensioner, and you're earning 3% because you've got fees, you've got costs, you need a margin to cover your overhead, and you want to also create a profit for Prudential shareholders. So the 3% return on bonds goes 2% to the pensioner, 0.5% for profit, and 0.5% to cover overheads, roughly speaking. Then on we go through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Norwich Union sets up and provides men with bikes and satchels, and they go competing with the Prudential around the streets of Liverpool. What do they say to win the business? We'll give you 3% return. So how does the Pru compete with that? What do they do now? They've obviously got to compete and give 3%. How do you earn 3%?
Cut your fees.
You cut your fees,
Get into equities instead of bonds.
take more risk, earn more return, get into equities instead of bonds, Japanese derivatives, real estate, initially mortgages. It would be initially real estate mortgages to give you a bit of a, how the world goes round in a big circle, Yolanda. How do we get yield now? We do lending, right? So mortgages, everything, exotic investments, the lot. You've got an equities desk, you've got an overseas equities desk, you've got a derivatives desk, you've got a real estate desk. And by 1987, the Pru is managing about 100 billion, and it's got 500 investment professionals in the Pink Palace down the road. How many of the real estate professionals, how many real estate professionals have they got in their 500 people? And to give you a clue, they've got 100 billion of assets under management, 10 billions in real estate. How many real estate people? 0 out of 500. 2 out of 500. 10 out of 500. The answer is 300. So 300 of the 500 investment professionals working for the Pru in 1987 are real estate people. 200 are equities, bonds, Japanese derivatives, whatever exotic you can think of. 60% of the staff is working in real estate, managing 10% of the assets. What does the CEO of the Pru say? This is too big a cost centre. So what does the CEO of real estate do?
Cuts people.
He either cuts people, which he didn't do in 87 actually, that was about 91 he decided he was going to do that. But your first effort, there's only sort of two ways you can sort yourself out. You either grow your top line or cut your costs. Outsource, they could do that.
Or make 60% of your portfolio real estate.
Yeah, okay. Now, if you're thinking that the only real estate business is internal, what about other business? Is all of Goldman Sachs investment management business the partner's capital?
Additional investors.
So we go looking for more business, right? We've got 300 people. They're pretty good at doing UK real estate. They're 300 experts. They're doing property development, they're doing industrial, they're doing residential, they're doing offices, they're doing everything. They should know what they're doing. And they've got a good return track record. Okay, so they go to Unilever, or Unilever Pension Fund comes to them and says, right, we've got 100 million, we'd like you to manage it for us. And the Pru charge a fee. The fee goes into covering the cost of running 300 people. The head of real estate can have a proper conversation with the CEO of Prudential saying, I'm a profit centre, I'm earning plenty of fees, I can justify the 300 people. And Unilever have 100 million pension pot, which is managed by Prudential. 10% of that goes into real estate. Right, 10 million of Unilever's money is going into real estate. What would you do with 10 million?
Buy assets.
How many assets could you buy for 10 million in 1990? It depends, okay. UK, okay. Well, you're going to be interested in shopping centres, London offices, industrial estates. Right, so you're not going to be able to buy enough assets with 10 million. You can't buy a shopping centre. You can buy a couple of unit shops, a pretty small office somewhere, and maybe a couple of factories. So you're not diversified, and you've not got interesting assets. So Yolanda says, well, the obvious thing to do then is pool that money with other money. So Prudential takes the 10 million, it gets 10 other pension funds, they all put 10 million in, you've got a 100 million pot, that creates a fund. The fund is called the Prudential Property Fund. Unilever's got 10% of it and so on, and Pru charges a fee of 1% on assets for managing that fund. So that, to cut the long story short, Prudential goes from being an insurer, the man on the bike collecting insurance premiums, and a pension provider, life assurance savings policies, to an investor, and then a financial services provider, then a fund manager, managing money for its own policy holders, its own shareholders and for external pension funds. And then it becomes a lender and it becomes a fully fledged financial services house.